You ready? 1, 2, 3, we'll start.
1, 2, 3, we'll start. Go.
All right, my name is Tony Silva and I want to discuss some baby conures. I want to go through a physical exam and then we're going to teach how to feed these chicks. These chicks were just removed from the nest. The parents stopped feeding them, so in order to save them, we need to hand rear them. And we're going to do a simple physical. Because they're big enough to not be in a brooder, we keep them in a tub. We want to make sure that we have at least 1.5 inches, about 35 millimeters of shavings, and we want medium coarse. We don't want fine because the fine will have little pieces that can get lodged in the mouth, sort of like that, and they will swallow it. If they swallow that, that could cause some problems. So the chicks were removed because the parents stopped feeding them. We see that the crop is empty. They're hydrated. If they were dehydrated, they would be much darker. We keep them covered when they're not being fed because they cannot thermoregulate very well. They need to stay in a warm environment, and the body heat that they generate as a group, they can huddle together, and they can also generate enough heat that with a towel, they can stay warm. So we look at the chicks, and we want to look at the mouth. We want to look at the eyes. We want to make sure that they're clean. Crusty eyes are a problem. The feet should look clean. There's something called toe restricting syndrome where literally rings develop around toes and strangulate them. So we want to make sure that the toes are fine. 2 toes forward, 2 backwards, as you can see. If all the toes are pointing forward, then we clearly have a problem, and then we need to address that. And that will be the subject of a future video. We want to make sure that the ears, if they're open and they're not, are clean. We don't want any exudate or any shavings or anything stuck in the ear cavity. We want to make sure that the down is clean. If they've been throwing up, you would see wet areas or areas that were once wet and have dried and they're sort of sticky around the beak. So we know that this chick, they stopped feeding it, but he's in good condition. He's hydrated. He's not inactive. He's responsive. He's responsive to my touch. We always want to stimulate a chick before we feed it, and we do that because they have pressure points along the sides of their beaks. These are soft bulbous pads that the parents bite on to stimulate feeding. Normally, when you touch these pads, we can elicit a feeding response. So, and you can see it there. He's actually pumping, and he'll pump more and more as he gets used to being fed. Now, we're going to give them their first feeding. So we want to make sure that we have the proper thickness of formula. This is a little bit too thick initially. We want to make it watery so that they are forced to take it down until they figure out that, hey, this is food. It's going to keep me alive. So we wanted something like runny oatmeal. We want to make sure that it is at 40 degrees Celsius. We don't want to go warmer because we can burn them. If it's too cold, you're going to get 0 feeding response. We can use many instruments. I like a spoon with the sides bent upwards, but most people prefer a syringe. It's easier and it's quicker. Now, we want a syringe with a tip that's slightly long. We do not want this. You're going to cause damage with this. If the only syringe that you have is this, you want to cut that off. So you would have it like that. And then when you cut it, run it under a flame very quickly so that you have no sharp edges. I'll feed the chick initially with a spoon so that you can see what it's like. And then we will go ahead and feed it with a syringe. So you see, because the spoon has sides, it touches the soft pads on the sides of the beak, and that stimulates feeding. We would not achieve the same result initially with a syringe unless we do something, and I'll explain what we do. So clearly he's hungry. They haven't been, the parents stopped feeding him today. When we use a syringe, we want to dip our fingers in water, and the water should be warm, and then we're going to literally touch the sides of the beak. If we don't do that, we don't get as good of a feeding response. So my fingers are wet. I touch the feeding spot, what stimulates feeding, and then we feed them. We want to start off with a smaller amount of food, and then we can progress with volume. So again, I'm touching the soft pads to elicit a feeding response. We want to make sure that conures, and these are sun conures, they have a fatty diet, a fatty formula. We don't want to add fruits. 20, 30 years ago, the concept was that you wanted to add baby food. You wanted to add bananas or strawberries. We don't want to add anything with sugar. We know that sugar causes yeast to go crazy, and that's not healthy. Clearly, parrots have not evolved to eat ripe fruits. They avoid them in the wild. They eat fruits green. So we want to make sure that we feed them a very low sugary food. We've added fat to the formula so that they get what they need. This one still has some food. The parents fed it. It's chunky. It's often multicolored, and that's because they feed seeds. They feed whatever they can get. Again, we're gonna touch the feeding pad to stimulate. And then when you use a long tip syringe, you need to alternate. Now, yes, people will say, oh, but if you do it from this side, you can aspirate. You always want to go, and yes, you can. But what you want to do is you want to alternate, and we're not shoving it down there. We're just literally depositing the food in the mouth for the chick to feed. If we're careful, we don't cause any damage. We don't deviate the beak, and we can achieve what we want. That's about how we want to maintain the crop. Many people say that when you hand-reared parrots, you want to make sure that the crop is fully empty when you take them out of the nest. Nonsense. I've been doing this for 45 years. We feed them the minute we take them out of the nest. If they have food or not, we want them to get used to human contact. We also do not allow it to empty during the day. If a chick has problems digesting, it is a management flaw. It is not because there's food in the crop. That crop evolved to hold food and to hold food at all times. It did not evolve, and the parents do not follow the rule that it must empty before they get fed again. So again. And this is the first feeding these chicks have had. Just by me touching them with my thumb, we're eliciting a feeding response. And we're going slow. You know, once they've been doing this for a few days, they recognize the food readily, and then they feed more vigorously. You can also do this, which is literally you're grabbing the pads. And I like to do one side so that I have greater vision of what's going on. And that's basically it. You want to leave them to sleep. They need a dark environment. You don't want to keep them in a bright environment. They would be in a nest at this stage where it's dark. When you make formula, make sure you use a double bath, a bain-marie, where you're literally keeping the formula warm. If the formula cools, they're going to reject it. They're not going to want to eat. So we want to make sure that we have the formula at the right temperature. That's all for now.